So today I want to discuss a very old horror film in the vein of the season that I've never seen. I think I saw it when I was a wee little baby, but I don't remember anything. My father, colleagues have always told me to watch this movie, and I do not know why I haven't up until now. And thank God I did, and I regret not watching it many years ago. 1935, The Bride of Frankenstein.
Friend?
It's September, we're into October in a couple weeks, and it's horror movie season. And as I said before, I'm a very seasonal movie watcher. Frankly, when it comes to this film, I'm surprised that I haven't seen it since I was a little boy. Everyone's told me to watch it. My father used to rave about it. This movie is highly regarded as one of the best horror movies ever made. Definitely the #1 MonsterVerse movie from Universal back in the 30s and 40s. This movie is quite unique as it is a sequel, and for at the time, sequels kind of were highly different, a new story than the original movie. This film takes place right after the end of the first film. Well, apparently he's not dead, as this film opens up right at that moment. He comes out of the destruction, kills somebody in fear, and then runs off into the forest again in the village looking for whatever, a friend. Henry Frankenstein is back at his home, caught up in guilt, trauma with his lover Elizabeth. He's obviously very shook by what happened. He's scared of the monster he created, and he just seems like he's in some sort of recovery state. An old colleague of his, Dr. Pretorius, shows up. Now, Dr. Pretorius claims that he has, with a different approach, created life as well, but from the cells up. And he showcases this by unveiling these small, tiny humans encapsulated in glass, and they're kings, they're ballerinas, and they seem like they are fully moving, and it's really creepy. And at the sight of this, Dr. Frankenstein is kind of taken back.
Here about my exhibits. My first experiment was so lovely that we made her a queen.
Dr. Pretorius convinces him somehow to take up his work again. They could put their skill sets together and combine and make a mate for this monster.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
Now, Dr. Pretorius is much more sinister, much creepier, and much more maniacal than Henry Frankenstein, since we see the guilt from Henry Frankenstein. Dr. Pretorius really doesn't have that moral compass, and he really doesn't show it throughout the film, as he is conniving, manipulative, and we'll get into that. So Frankenstein's out in the countryside, comes across this pretty woman. At the sight of him, she freaks out and faints and falls into the water. He jumps in, saves her in the water. She comes out, wakes up, sees him again, freaks out. This guy does not catch a break, and you really empathize with this monster, that he just wants a human connection. But unfortunately, he's not human, and unfortunately, people's ignorance and fear push them away from him. So he only knows how to respond in anger and defensiveness. So he runs off into the forest again, and eventually he's caught by the villagers. They bring him back to the village. They put him in shackles in, I guess, a dungeon of some sort, and his strength eventually overpowers the shackles. He breaks out again and runs back off into the forest. Now, the monster, on his way in the forest, running around, comes across a blind man in a cottage. Now, this whole sequence is one of the most emotional, beautiful sequences I've ever seen. This blind man, ignorant to the monster's appearance, brings him in and claims that he's been asking for a friend and praying for a friend for so long. And he takes Frankenstein in, and immediately the warmth comes over the monster. And he is so happy that he's with somebody. He feeds him. He puts him in bed. He almost tucks him in and prays over him and cries.
Thou hast taken pity on my great loneliness, and now out of the silence of the night hast brought two of thy lonely children together. and sent me a friend to be a light to mine eyes and a comfort in time of trouble. Amen.
It's just so beautiful and heartbreaking that for this small period of time, the monster finds peace. And Boris Karloff knocks it completely out of the park with his facial expressions, his character, his crying. It really is a performance for the ages, especially with the material he was given. The next morning, or maybe it's a couple days later, they don't really say, and he's teaching him to talk. He says drink, he says friend, you know, they're really starting to bond. Unfortunately, this doesn't last too long. Oh, and he shows him how to smoke a cigar or a pipe, whatever it is, and immediately Frankenstein's taken back by the fire, but the blind man comforts him and shows him it's okay.
Good.
So he really is opening him up a little bit to the world. Unfortunately, this doesn't last too long as two villagers show up. They see it's the monster immediately. They freak out. They try to save the blind man, but he's like, no, it's my friend. What are you doing? With this monster offensively, starts fighting with these guys, knocks over something. The whole hut burns down. The two villagers run off with the blind man who's like, why did you do this? Where's my friend? And now Frankenstein is lost in the forest again, riddled with guilt that he burned down his only friend's house. And he's just out there, where's my friend? Friend. It's absolutely heartbreaking. So Pretorius has two assistants, much more maniacal than Igor. They're really creepy. It's very realistic how they would take money to do anything. So he has them basically find some bones and body parts that he could use. And this in the morgue where they had taken some of the bones. He sets up this dinner and this wine. It's very macabre and very morbid that this creepy doctor is sitting in a morgue on a coffin, drinking and eating. And you get a sense of like a serial killer almost, some sort of megalomaniac. And out of the shadows comes Frankenstein.
Oh. I thought I was alone.
And Pretorius talks with him and somehow convinces him to help him in his goals. So now we go back to Henry and Pretorius coming up with their plan. Henry Frankenstein seems to be apprehensive. His lover Elizabeth does not want him to do this. She's kind of the conscious in the moment. And he tells Pretorius that he's not going to do this.
Don't tell me of it. I don't want to hear. I've changed my mind.
Pretorius has other plans.
I expected this. No, not that. Oh, he's quite harmless. Except when crossed.
He now has with this monster capture Elizabeth and imprison her, using her as ransom to force Henry's hand in doing the experiment. So now Henry Frankenstein, Dr. Pretorius are up in the castle getting ready to begin the experiment or the event, whatever you want to call it. Henry's busy working on a heart. He says the heart's not good. He needs a fresh heart from a sudden death.
This heart is useless. I must have another. And it must be sound and young. Carl.
You must go to your friend at the accident hospital.
What we need is a female victim of sudden death. Can you do it?
You promised me 1,000 crowns.
So Pretorius says, no, I'll take care of it. Sends one of his assistants out. And what do? They just kill a girl on the street, take her heart out, and bring it to him. They don't really show that. Obviously, it's the early 30s or mid-30s. But the way it works is really creepy. Henry Frankenstein's even wondering where they got the heart. You know, if they killed somebody or did take it from a morgue. Either way, it's still messed up all around that they're doing this. They're getting ready to raise the body. The figure's all wrapped up. She's good to go. The experiment begins. They send her up into the sky to get the electrification. All the levers are being pulled, the buttons are being moved, the lightning, the mechanics. It's all just so beautiful and all so fun. With this monster winds up killing one of the assistants up on top of the castle, throws him off. The body at that point is lifted back down to the bottom. Her eyes open. We get the classic, "She's alive, alive." Pretorius is all pumped up. Frankenstein eventually comes down and looks around. They cut forward a little bit. Now they have the Bride of Frankenstein all dressed in the iconic imagery with the white streaks in the hair. Frankenstein sees this. He kind of gets happy about it, walks out, and what happens? She rejects him twice. It's not working. He's now pissed off, and he basically starts this whole scene. Elizabeth comes up to the window and screams. Henry tells her to get out of here. She goes, "I'm not going without you." So she comes in, grabs Henry, goes out, and this is one of the most beautiful endings in film history.
Look out! The lever! To the weakness!
This monster, played again by the amazing Boris Karloff, looks at Henry and says,
Yes, go! You live! Go! You stay. We belong dead.
And you actually see a tear rolling down his eyes. Blows the whole laboratory castle up, and you're left with Henry and Elizabeth embracing each other.
Darling.
This movie is just a phenomenal piece of art. The performances in this film are incredible. Obviously, Boris Karloff.
Sit down.
He's kind of typecast back in the day for the horror movies, The Mummy, the first Frankenstein, a lot of films back then. But this one really showcases his acting abilities, even when he really doesn't have to speak much. But they do have the monster speak in this movie, which I think was a controversial point when they were making this movie, but it really works out in the end. Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein, the classic character. Elsa Lanchester, with the small amount of screen time, but the iconic look and noises and hissing and screeching. Interestingly enough, in the beginning, we get a prologue to the film where a couple rich aristocrats are discussing horror stories or scary stories in the rain in a castle, and the girl, who she also plays, is named Mary Shelley, which we know is the author of the original story. So it's funny, back in the 30s, how Universal was throwing some, I guess what we would call Easter eggs into the film. Just a side note, but really an interesting opening to the film itself.
What of my Mary?
She is an angel.
You think so?
You hear? Come, Mary. Come and watch the storm.
You know how lightning alarms me.
And the maniacal Pretorius, played by Ernest Thesiger. And of course the blind man, who's just incredible. This movie has many themes. It's complex. It's not just about a mean monster going around killing people. It questions humanity. It talks about ignorance. It really showcases societal's fear of things they don't know or understand. Frankenstein wasn't a bad person. He was just unfortunately created in the world, and the world rejected him. That's a very common theme in history and through pop culture and entertainment and just our world in general. So the movie definitely stuck with me for a couple days, and I'll watch it every year around this time, and I'm glad I did watch it. It's paced wonderfully. The set design is incredible. It almost feels like a play. The black and white contrast is beautiful. The cinematography is good, and the sets are just almost over the top, especially when it comes to the castle. But my wife commented on the way the angles are, and it's just such a unique look, and it's so iconic to the Monsterverse. I mean, a lot of those movies back then had that feel, whether it was The Invisible Man, The Wolfman, Dracula, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, the original Frankenstein. Those are probably the top tier movies of that collection. But this one sits at the top, especially now after seeing it. I mean, there really is no argument. It's just a wonderful movie. Ahead of its time, and definitely a must-watch, especially around this time of year. So thank you for watching. I hope you all go check out The Bride of Frankenstein. I hope that was succinct enough for you. I'm definitely working on this. Hopefully I'll get better. But now I'm going to go finish up some yard work, and tonight I'm probably going to fall asleep to Young Frankenstein, which, after seeing this movie, makes a whole lot more sense to me of things that they pulled from. How good is Young Frankenstein?
Let me out. Let me out of here. Get me the hell out of here. What's the matter with you people? I was joking!